Hello, I'm Judy Stiles. Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. Well, I have a tradition on this program of interviewing people at Missouri Southern as they approach retirement. And today I have an opportunity to visit with one of my coworkers, Bill Hunt, our Creative Services Director. Thank you for being here today, Bill.
Well, thank you, Judy. It's an honor to be here with you today.
Well, I know a lot of people, as retirement gets even closer, you're actually still, quote, on the payroll at Missouri Southern, but it's getting really close. Probably the first question is, how is it feeling as retirement is drawing closer and closer?
Well, it feels really happy and kind of really sad at the same time. I was just telling Mike a while ago, it is kind of an odd feeling, but I think I'm going to like it.
Well, you are one of the people that the viewers may not recognize because you're behind the scenes. You're really the person who really works with our students and everything, makes things happen here at Missouri Southern. But there are a lot of jobs behind the scenes. People may not realize you've had a 40-plus year career in television.
Well, that's true. I think when a lot of people watch television, they don't realize that it takes an entire crew. It's a real team effort to get that show on the air, whether it's live or whether it's post-produced or whatever. And there are a lot of different jobs in that, and it takes a lot of different skill sets, and that's what I've been doing for the last 40 or so years.
And you are originally from Joplin, so you
Yes.
grew up in Joplin, and you stayed
Yes.
in Joplin and worked in this television market.
Yes. I've been lucky enough to work in 3 of the major stations, KGCS being this one, but
Right.
prior to that I was at KODE, and prior to that I was at Channel 16. So yeah, it's been a good career, and I've loved every minute of it.
Well, I know a lot of people wonder about long careers like that, especially when you stay in that business. How did you get started? Television, what sparked your interest early on?
I actually grew up in an automotive shop with my dad, but in the late 70s, I got interested in journalism and broadcasting. And I had a friend that worked at Channel 16 briefly, and he had left to go to another state. But anyway, one night we were at home watching the newscast, and unfortunately it went horribly. Everything that the anchor said, let's take a look at that, did not come up. So that led me out to go to Channel 16 because they had an opening. And luckily enough, the gentleman that I met there, his name was Sherman Simpson, a wonderful man. He became one of my mentors, and I was hired that day. Couldn't go to work immediately though because I had another job. So, but I'm glad I took that. I almost didn't. After he offered me the job, I almost thought, well, why would I want to do that? But I did, and I literally fell in love with it. And that was actually, I think, in the spring of 1975. That kind of tells you how long I've been doing this. So, but it turned out really good. I met some wonderful people and had some great times there.
And of course, from the viewer's perspective, they know that there are TV stations in their town, oftentimes where they live, and of course then you have the networks and so forth. But this local television aspect, where you are working in the community in which you live, you're meeting the people who are in that community. What makes local television special? Well,
actually, I think you just said the key word. I think it is the people. Like in those early years at KSN, and it wasn't called KSN then, it was called KTVJ. We had Carol Parker. She's still there occasionally. She's retired now, but occasionally you'll see her on the air. We had a man named Ted Easley who did the noon news, and he had the best baritone radio voice I've ever heard. And I think working with people like that and doing kind of what you do to this day, interviewing the local people on a local show, and that's what keeps everybody watching. I think it was really a very widely watched local 12 o'clock newscast. I know it was.
I know television has, of course, changed tremendously over the years, and even your career as well. And we talk about equipment and people and so forth. But what do you remember as far as starting out, as far as the equipment compared to biggest difference between now and then? You know, we have digital now, we have this. What was the biggest difference then?
Well, I think the biggest difference for me, since I basically, when I started working, I worked in the control room. And I was the technical director for the 12 o'clock newscast. And we had a video switcher that had 1 row of buttons, about 10, I think, and that was it. So it was much more simpler than what we have today. You know, what you're using today to produce this show is just light years ahead of what we had. But I think the biggest difference is in the way things are recorded. Today we're recording on a computerized digital hard drive device. At that time, if we recorded, and I say if because most of those shows, as well as even today, the 6 p.m. newscast, they're not recorded. They may do what we call air checks occasionally, but I don't think that every single newscast is recorded. And back then, it was a rarity to record something because if we did, we recorded on what was called 2-inch videotape. which was a
Which
huge,
was literally 2 inches wide.
literally 2 inches wide, and the machine was huge and noisy and clanky and clunky, and I think I remember one time our chief engineer, a man named Lloyd that you and I spoke about earlier, would tell me that, well, we don't record because videotape cost a lot, and I don't know what a lot was, but I do remember us reusing multiple times a piece of videotape.
Right,
So,
you're going to
yeah.
reuse it because that's a valuable commodity.
Exactly,
Tying that together.
exactly, yeah.
Well, you said your interest started off in the news by watching the news and working in the control room. Long career in the production side. And for people who aren't familiar with television, we obviously have newscasts, but then there's that whole production side of the business. What led you along that path?
There is. Well, I think I was pushed into that by the people in the sales department. Early on at Channel 16, they only had 1 or 2 salespeople, but that began to grow as people began to use television for local advertising. So we had to go shoot commercials, and when that time came up, I can remember to this day the first commercial that I went to shoot was for, I believe it was Citizens Bank, which is now Commerce Bank.
Right.
And when I went to shoot it, I went with a gentleman named Frank Shaddy, another one of my mentors. Frank was one of the best film and still photographers that I've ever known. He took me out with a 16 millimeter film camera to shoot some film of the Commerce Bank building. And I did shoot it, but I don't think we used it. I think we used what Frank shot, not what I shot. But when we would take that back to the building, back to the station, we actually had a film processing room, which smelled a lot like a huge aquarium in your home.
Lots of chemicals.
Only maybe a little more stinky. A big room. I mean, it was probably, I'd say, a 10 by 15 room with lots of chemicals in it. So that was my start in learning how to properly use the camera, and evolved from that to a video camera. I remember our first video camera was an RCA TK76, which I thought was the answer to all cameras,
the dream for everybody. You can shoot
best
with
camera
video.
in the world, which we immediately burned the tube in. Those cameras had tubes. Cameras do not have tubes anymore. So we ruined that camera within 2 or 3 months. But what happened out of that is we started to produce television commercials. And it just blew up. It grew so big that I stopped doing the noon news. I became what they had never had one before. I became what they called a production manager.
Right.
And I managed a team of about 6 people, and that's all we did was shoot and edit commercials. And we sent them everywhere. We sent them to KOAM, we sent them to KODE, I sent them to Tulsa, several other markets. It became a huge, huge business. And then that's what led me to KODE. A gentleman named Bill Ocker, who worked at KODE. I had known him for years, and he called and he said, I need someone to head up this commercial production department. He said, we're doing so much. He said, I can't keep up with it. Well, I blew him off because I thought, well, why would I want to go over there?
Here.
Yeah, so, but after a few conversations, that's how I wound up at KODE. And at that time, KODE was pretty far above Channel 16 in terms of commercial production and news. They were pretty much on top. And KOAM too. We did a lot of things for KOAM. Yeah.
So you're producing commercials, and then there's those special programs. I know for years that we had the telethons, for instance.
Oh,
you were
we did.
involved in those things that people watch when we used to have the Labor Day telethons. That took a crew to put those on the local television stations as well.
It did. I think the telethons, when we first started doing them, the Jerry Lewis telethons, muscular dystrophy, the MDA, that was a big deal. It was a very big deal. And I think I met, when I came to KODE, I think in '83, Mr. Jim Lobby had retired from television, kind of. He went back to work, I think, in Springfield Market after that. But I got to meet Jim. And he was the host for the local segments on those MDA telethons. And I think I did 18 of those. I have a plaque in my office
For all
that.
the awards.
Yeah. But Jim was just a phenomenal guy to work with, one of the nicest guys. And I believe you remember he came out here to KGCS and worked with the Visions volunteers. Betty, which Betty? I can't remember.
Rand or Betty Marty. We had a couple
one
of
of them.
senior citizens who volunteered, right?
And we did some shows with him out here. And so anyway, I got to know Jim. And when we first started that, we actually did it in the KODE studios, which meant we had to transform the studios into telethon.
Take away the news desk and make it.
And those literally did go on all night. We stayed there all night. So myself and Jim and the crew, we all got to know each other really well. And when we weren't on the air and we were watching Jerry Lewis, we would all gather around the switcher. And I remember we would sit on the switcher, and I never drank coffee, but everybody else did. And it'd be 3 o'clock in the morning. We're all sitting around drinking coffee, but I'd have a Coke, you know.
To get the caffeine off the Coke.
and Jim smoked, so he had to go outside, you know. And so, but yeah, those were great times. And Nancy Hudson, I don't know if you remember her, the Harley lady. She was the MDA girl for quite a few years, and she was there with us several times at night.
So a lot of memories, a lot of history of local TV, and of course, then 19 years here at Missouri Southern, KGCS. So
yes.
That transition to working for the university and the station we have at the university.
Yes. You know, I can remember, you remember Dr. Leon and his wife Vivian, and Vivian had the International Piano Competition. Well, I remember one time at KODE, before I came to Missouri Southern, I get a phone call from this woman named Vivian, and she wanted to know that if my production department would help her with the, I guess the final concert, the final concert, the gala concert here at Southern. And all she needed was a couple of cameras and a couple of people. And I remember saying yes to that. Boy, did I not know what I was getting into.
Big production, right?
So anyway, we came out and we helped with that. We set up cameras in Taylor Auditorium, and that was when I met face to face with Vivian Leon. Little did I know that I'd be coming out here later and working with her. And but so I had been on Southern, and you know, I think we'd been in this studio a couple of times with the CP Telethon. Right. So we came out here, we contracted with you to use your studio for that. But so anyway, shortly after that, shortly after I met Mrs. Leon, I think I talked to you and Don Ross about an opening out here. And I kind of blew that off too at first. I thought, well, why would I want to go out there? But I'm so glad I did. I can remember meeting you and meeting Mr. Robert Clark, Dr. Robert Clark, in the conference room. And you remember Dr. Mormon?
Department head at the time.
I came out here to do the interview. Do you remember that Dr. Mormon was a no-show? He didn't show up for my interview. And I did not meet him until later in the day. I was here quite a while.
Yeah, they go through a series of steps.
Yeah, I think it was Dr. Agee, Dr. Terry Agee, that I had to go interview with. So an hour and a half later, I come back over here, and I think it was you or Dr. Clark that said, well, you've got the job. But I didn't meet Dr. Mormon, who, for those of you that don't know, Dr. Mormon was the head of the communication department at the time. I came back over, and I can't remember where I was. I think it was in here, in the studio. And this person walks in full tennis outfit, you know, going to go play tennis. Got the bag over his shoulder, got the tennis rackets, walks in, and real hurriedly says, hello, I'm Dr. Mormon. I heard you just got hired. I got to go play tennis. He's gone. So that was my introduction to the department head. So anyway, thought that was kind of cool.
And so the different projects you've worked on throughout the years, we have some pictures, I think, that kind of take us through some of the Missouri Southern memories that they can roll some of those, because you've worked with the students, you've worked on many productions. I think you also have some of your cars.
Well, these are actually some photos from my house. I am a car nut. These are twin 55 Chevys that my son, my oldest son, and I built. And that's a little shot at the drag strip. He's for about 12 years, he's been a big time drag racer. I'm really proud of him.
So you're part of the pit crew for him.
I am part of the pit crew. In the very beginning, I built the car, but now it's way over my head electronics wise. That was my grandson Carter there. These are some cars that I've worked on and helped restore. That's the newest addition to our family. That's Lincoln James Hunt. He's 3 months old. He's at my house right now. That's his big sister. She's 2 years old. Her name is Ava.
So she's taking care of little brother.
And that's the first time she'd ever held him. So she was pretty happy to be able to hold her brother. So that's what my life is like now. I help my wife Becky take care of these kids, and I build race cars, and that's just another car that belongs to a client that I did a lot of work on. A very beautiful, beautiful car. Some of these photos don't do them justice. That actually belongs to one of my neighbors. This car here is very special. I think there's a lot of photos of it. You can go through them pretty quick, guys. This car belongs to Dr. Gubera from Missouri Southern. A very special car that he bought himself from Mr. Roper Sr., Hal Roper's dad, and I can't think of his first name. Was it Larry? I think it was Larry Roper. He bought it brand new in 1964. These photos are actually about 10 years old. This is when I restored it for him at my house. It's a beautiful car, appraised it in the $45,000 range. Just a beautiful car. And we did frame off, we powder coated the frame. I do everything but paint. I have a couple of paint shops that do specific paint for me. We did a full interior on this one, headliner, seats and everything. Just a beautiful, beautiful car. And occasionally, once in a blue moon, you will see it out in our parking lot because Dr. Gubera will drive it.
And he drives it in the homecoming parades often.
He does, he does. It is an original, 100% original numbers matching 64 GTO that he says he has the check he paid for it and the receipt.
Proof that he bought it.
From 1964, yeah.
So you earlier said that you grew up in a household, working on cars, so that really carried through as a life, a hobby or
it
an interest.
It does. This is my Zen place. That's my shop there in the background. Whenever I am burnt to a crisp from a football game or a basketball game here at Southern, I go home and I go in my shop. And that is where I can kind of get my brain back in order. And I work very much alone and by myself. I've kind of always been that way. I really can't get anything done if somebody's there talking to me. But that's what I do. This particular car here, it belongs to a friend of mine. And believe it or not, about 30 years ago, I redid the mechanicals on this car. It's a 58 Corvette. Belongs to a good friend named Larry Mills. I'm getting emotional looking at it because unfortunately Larry passed away a couple of years ago. His son still has the car, and that's why it's sitting in my driveway. The white convertible top had been down so long they couldn't get it up, so he brought it over and I got it up for him. And it's just that driving that car is like driving a piece of history. That's just a wonderful piece of machinery.
A lot of history, a lot of interest. So people who in the area, they see car shows, they're oftentimes going to see some cars that you have worked on or your cars.
They will. This car especially is in a lot of shows. And these last couple of pictures, this is Ava's birthday. I wish Ava was here. She's just such a doll. There's a couple more pictures in here I wanted you to see at the very end of Carter and his sister Lexi that I wanted to show you. Well, there's another car that's in my shop right now. That's a 55 two-door post.
So you have work in progress as we speak.
I do, and I as I said, that white and turquoise 56 is a car that I built about 6 or 7 years ago. There's Larry. I know you can't see him, but he's right behind the car sitting. Great guy. Now this is from about 5, and I wanted you to see this, Judy, because this is Carter and Lexi from about 5 years ago. And do you recognize where they are?
Learning how to punch the buttons on
we
the
were
switcher.
We were out and about on a Saturday, and we drove by the building here, and Lexi said, "What's in there? What's in there?" She wanted to know.
Here, but she wanted to know.
She wanted to know what was in my building, so that was where we went. I think there's one more, guys, of them, and. There's Lexi sitting in your chair because she wanted to know what was in here. I thought that was pretty cool. Lexi is a sophomore this year, so this was about 5 years ago. She's a big-time athlete. She plays softball for Diamond, and she's a grade A student. So,
great. So
I'm really proud of her.
Personal interest, family interest, tying, obviously, working at Missouri Southern, the Southern family has been a big part, because I know you've also touched a lot of students over the years. We have student organizations. You've worked with our Southern broadcasters in addition to teaching the students as well.
I have. I've been really lucky enough to work with some of the greatest students, and those students that do the football games, the basketball games, and just what these students are doing today. Well, here's some shots. And I do remember this. This was in L.A. This was at an MBS conference in L.A. just great memories from that. And that old equipment that I think Trevor is dismantling as we speak. This is from Dancing with the Joplin Stars, and I love doing that.
So the productions at Missouri Southern took you a lot of places and did a lot of different things.
It did some wonderful stuff we did, and I working with the Chamber of Commerce on the Dancing with the Joplin Stars, and then of course the Chamber of Commerce banquets that we did have here on campus. I hope maybe when COVID's over with that will resume, but those were pretty cool times too. And those students, I was telling Mike Olmstead a few minutes ago, it's kind of a magical thing. About a month ago, I got a letter from a student that graduated, I think 2 years ago. And one of the things she told me she loved doing was Dancing with the Stars. It's just amazing how years later something like that comes back. And also, I don't know, do you remember Ashley Caffey? You know, she graduated, what, 10 years ago?
Yeah.
She wrote me a letter saying that one of the things she enjoyed, now you're not going to believe this, one of the things she enjoyed was going to city council. She said, I never thought I would enjoy listening to government things, but she said, thanks for teaching me how to do city council. And I was like, wow, I can't believe
So you never
that.
know really how you're touching students' lives, and some of them go on to work in the field, others go in different directions, but you've had a chance to impact them as you go.
I have, and it's a really good feeling. And you know, we had Phil Cross, who graduated, what, 10 years ago? And I think he's still in Oklahoma City, working for Fox, I believe. We've had so many, and I think that's what kept me going all these years. You know, knowing those students, and when you get to know them, and you become friends with them, and you get to know their families and a lot of their parents. It's a really magical thing, and that's the part that I'll miss. And then working with you and all the crew here. You know, Ward and Trevor and Tennyson and Brian and Mike and everybody here, I'm going to miss that.
You hear a lot about the Southern family, and that's an aspect of the people you get to work with. You get to know them.
Oh, it is.
It is. Together.
Yeah.
And so we've seen a lot of changes, of course, here at Missouri Southern and our station. We recently went HD, which is something that's been a goal. You know, that television's an evolution. What do you think, you know, looking in the future for students who are here now working in the studio, what are the future possibilities for them?
Well, you're certainly right about that. I know just last week or so, you and Trevor informed me that we did go to full HD broadcasting, and I'm really proud of that, because now when you tune into this show or any of the shows that we air, the quality is there and it's crystal clear. And I think the future of broadcasting, though, I'm sure it will change, as you know it has in probably the last 6 years or so, even with the broadband changes that we've had, the channel number changes, the frequencies, and I think that's going to happen again. I think if you look at the FCC and the allocations for the broadband and what they're going to do with it, you know, I'm sure it'll change again. I know we've been Channel 21 now, what, 2 years?
Year and a half now.
Year and a half. And I think when we talked to Al over in IT, he said, I'd give that about a 5-year run. And he said, then we're going to change again. You know, and I believe that even one of the engineers over at KOM felt that way too. He said, yeah, and they dodged the bullet last time. They didn't have to change. But he said, we won't be so lucky next time. And he thought maybe 5 years too. But I do think, you know, streaming and all of these other services, the many different services where you can pick up streaming, I think that could be maybe the future of what KGCS is going to be.
Well, throughout all these changes over the years, what would you say to someone, whether it's a young student today, or what's the key to success? Because you've gone through all the technical changes, the people changes. You know, what makes someone successful?
Well, I think the real key to success like that in broadcasting and journalism is that you never stop learning, and it never stops evolving, and it never stops changing. So learn all that you can, and just be able to adapt to it. You know, I remember early in my career, I worked with a gentleman who was just kind of a nervous Nelly, and he used to get mad at me because I wouldn't get nervous or I wouldn't get upset. And I learned a long time ago that just doesn't pay.
In situations.
I remember I told Ward Bryant one day, we were getting ready for a football game and lots of things were going wrong. And I said, Ward, don't worry about it. Even though we don't have this camera or that camera or this piece of equipment, the game's going to go on and we're going to go on. And you just have to learn to adapt. But I would say for anybody wanting to get a job in this career is to learn a little bit of everything. You know, in front of the camera, but there's so many jobs behind the camera, and look at the NFL or Major League Baseball or hockey. I mean, when you see those programs on the air, there's probably 100 people behind the scenes making that happen, and it's a fun time. And I encourage anybody, if you're interested in it, to get into it.
So you've really enjoyed your career and enjoyed your time working.
Oh, I did. I have, yeah.
And now it's time to go on to that next transition of retirement. We saw your cars and your family, a chance to try something else out.
It is. You know, I really don't feel old. I still think in my head that I'm a young guy.
Right.
So yeah, it's like someone said earlier, it'll be my next career. So I'm going to take some time off. I'm not going to do anything for just a few months, but I actually do have a job offer, and I found out that yes, you actually can work and retire at the same time.
Right, so keep things in a different type of way.
Right.
Well, Bill, I'd like to thank you for joining me today, and once again, thank you for all the work you've done for us here at KGCS and Missouri Southern over the years as well.
Well, thank you for having me, Judy, and it's been, Missouri Southern has literally been my second home, so I have loved every minute of it.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to thank you, the viewers, for joining us this week for Newsmakers. I'm Judy Stiles. Hope you can join me again next week at the same time on the station. We'll see you then.